Hello, my name's Charlotte Connolly, and I'm the museum curator at the Polar Museum. And I'm joined today by Alex Partridge, who's our collections coordinator, which means that he looks after the collections and makes sure that they're all properly looked after. Now, Alex, today we're going to talk about an artwork by an artist called Emanuel A. Peterson. Can you tell me a bit about the artwork and how you came across it?
Yeah, so it's a large framed oil painting, and it's been in the institute since about the 1980s when it was given to us. Um, and I came across it first in 2018 when we were actually taking it off the wall in the institute to go on display in Bonhams for the Polar Encounters exhibition. And I found it quite interesting more recently than I did at the time. I think we were both a bit surprised actually that it was chosen to go in the exhibition because it had been sort of buried around the back in the Friends room. So we have this room in the library where staff would often take breaks and there was space for meetings and things like that. But over the years, furniture had been gradually moved in, and new bookcases and things obscured this painting that was on the wall somewhat, and it was kind of a bit sorry and a bit forgotten, really. And it was only in getting it back from Bonhams and unwrapping it and putting it back into store because the Friends room was then going to be refurbished that I really started to get an appreciation for the artwork.
Yeah, so I remember choosing it for that exhibition and various people saying, oh, that piece, yeah, I mean, I know the one you mean, but really? And then when you saw it on the wall in all its glory and nicely lit and everything, it really did pop. It stood out. So
Yeah, and that sort of the way it grabs you actually when you really look at it, it's amazing how unarresting it first appeared when you get more of an appreciation for it because the boldness of the colors and the lines in it really do make it stand out even amongst some of the other artworks of a similar sort of polar landscape that we have in the collection. I don't know if it's a sort of Art Nouveau or even arts and crafts style, but it's certainly of that period. But the artist himself is Danish
mhm.
and trained in the early 20th century in landscape painting. And then from about 1921 right up until his death, more or less, he would work in Greenland and became part of this group of painters known as the Greenland painters.
So tell me a bit about the artwork itself and what you find interesting about it.
Well, I think, like I said, the aesthetic quality of the work is arresting in itself, but also the historic window it kind of gives us on the partly on the Danish colonial mindset in Greenland at the time, and also on a kind of artistic, romantic ideal of the sort of imagined wilderness, effectively. So this painting itself, it's titled the Skerries Eggedsminde, which is named after a Norwegian person who originally settled the area. And I've probably butchered the pronunciation of the name. But today it's more commonly known in Greenlandic as Asiat. And it's actually one of the larger inhabited areas in Greenland, just at the southern end of Disco Bay on the west coast. Um, and so, and particularly at the time that Peterson was working there, it actually became a pretty important supply hub during the Second World War as materials and people were moved across the Atlantic into Europe from the United States. And so it's the painting's interesting that it displays none of those qualities, none of the human activity at all. Peterson himself was known for altering the landscapes that he painted later on. So what he would do would sketch, and this is quite common probably across the world, but particularly in the Arctic where it's too cold to set up an easel outside and get your oils out and start painting. So he would sketch and return to his studio and then work up the painting fully. And he would alter the angles and positions of features in the landscape to suit his ideal. And he was particularly interested in representing what he thought was the indigenous quality of the landscapes that he painted. Particularly, when he did paint people, he would include the indigenous people and sometimes their skin boats and other equipment, and leave out any kind of elements, hints, or traces of white European settlement in the area. Which on the face of it is quite an interesting way to look at the world. And he may have seen it as an appreciation of that indigenous quality. But when we look at it today, it's effectively masking some of the colonial incursion into the landscape. And as I said, it was quite busy with wartime materials and supplies and people settling in that area as it is today.
So do you think his idealism and his way of producing these images might have been a bit of a reaction to the documentary photography that was going on at the time?
Yes, it's certainly a romantic look at the world, and it's interesting that he's taken this medium of romantic landscape painting at this period in particular, when, as you say, photography was so prevalent. And we certainly have lots of photographic evidence of the area from the period, and it's interesting to see that he's gone in and reimagined the landscape through this romantic artistic lens.
So this painting then has ended up in our collection at SPRI. Do you know anything about how it came to Cambridge and how we ended up with it?
Yes, so previously it actually sat in the office of the Danish General Consul in Edinburgh in the mid to late 20th century. The exact dates aren't quite known, but given that Peterson himself died in about 1946, it's possible that it had been there since the 1940s on. And its history in the Institute since it arrived is a little more murky, actually, to us. I don't know how many exhibitions it's been on or where else it's been on display, but I think that history of its position in the sort of Danish consulate in Britain, or at least in Scotland, is quite interesting in itself, and talks also to that Danish colonial mindset of here's a powerful European elite in a way who's got a representation of one of their kind of colonized districts on the wall of his office for all to see. So that makes a fairly powerful statement in itself. And Peterson was quite a prolific painter in his time, and he painted an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 paintings on commission, mostly of this sort. He was particularly interested in Greenland. As I said earlier, he was one of these Greenland painters.
And I believe there's a lot of his work in a museum or gallery in Ilulissat as well, in Greenland. So there's quite a lot. I mean, I hadn't realised he was quite so prolific, but yeah, there is more out there to find.
That's right, yeah. And it sits in a sort of wider tradition of this sort of romanticized landscape painting, not just in Europe and Greenland, but also in North America. There's a particularly well-known group of artists in the late 19th, early 20th century as well, who painted similarly bold, colourful works of art representing the Danish lands, representing the Canadian landscape.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Alex. That's really fascinating to hear about that artwork. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the Big Frieze Festival. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.